Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. Today I wanted to talk about the upcoming item set changes for Update 41. There weren't a ton of adjustments to existing sets, but I think a few of these are important to know, so let's go ahead and go through them. First up is Stinging Slashes. This is the Master's Dual Wield set. This set's damage done bonus now scales off 20.925% of the higher of your weapon or spell damage, rather than offering a flat bonus based on the item level up to 1635. This will result in a damage loss for most builds that are currently engaging with this set. Developer comment: we're adjusting the set to no longer grant a flat damage increase for anyone using it to one that is meant to shine for damage-oriented builds. This should significantly lower the pressure and kill potential the set is enabling for tankier builds in PvP, while retaining its potency for those who focus on damage over survivability. So breaking this down, in order to get back to that previous 1635 value that this set had, you need about 7,800 weapon and spell damage, which seems a little bit steep to me. As Zoss said, this is definitely a PvP targeted nerf here. I've seen some people questioning if it could be decent in PvE since we are regularly above that mark in group play, but based on a few trial dummy tests for Update 41 I've seen posted in my Discord server, it doesn't seem to be doing very well. I do like this set and I like the Twin Slashes ability a lot, but it definitely needs a little love if it's going to see some PvE use. Maybe it could scale up a little bit faster than they have it here, or offer some kind of increase to bleed or hemorrhaging damage to help balance out the underwhelming damage you get from the set bonus. I love the idea of Twin Slashes as a spammable, but not quite enough here to make it worth it. Definitely has some cool potential. The set isn't awful in PvE, it's just outclassed by many others. Next up, we have the Tormentor set from Banished Cells. This set now only taunts the first enemy hit by the ability that activates the set, rather than taunting any and all enemies hit by the ability. Due to this change, the set can now trigger off blinks such as Streak. The set now also heals for 45% of all damage done from the ability that activates the set. The developer comment essentially says that one of their core philosophies is to not have AoE taunts, and this has bypassed that for a long time now, so they want to get rid of that while also adding in some other bonuses to still make the set feel worth it for those that want to use it. Personally, I've never really used the set. I know some people really liked the AoE taunt aspect though, especially using it for werewolf tanking, so I'm not really sure whether people will still like this or not in its new form. But if you've used this set, let me know in the comments what you think about the change. Alright, next up we have a small change to Unleashed Terror. This is a medium set from Castle Thorn. Reduce the damage of this set by around 7% to make up for the buff to the hemorrhaging status effect. Overall, this will result in roughly a 2% damage increase for this set. So this one is kind of interesting. Along with the other status effects, hemorrhaging was adjusted for Update 41. It is still a 4-second dot, but it can now stack up to 3 times if it is reapplied before the 4 seconds runs out. So essentially at 1 stack, this is about 25% weaker than burning. At 2 stacks, hemorrhaging will hit about the same as burning, and then at 3 stacks, if you manage to proc it enough to get up to that point, the ticks will be about 25% stronger than burning. So there is some potential for really good damage from this status effect on builds that focus into bleed damage. And then here with the Unleash set, you will be able to guarantee getting to those 3 stacked ticks. So comparing this to a popular proc set, Pillar of Nirn, Pillar has a much more desirable 2 lines of crit chance instead of the 2 lines of stamina here. They're both on 10-second cooldowns, except Unleashed is a cooldown per target, not on the set itself. And then the base damage on Pillar is about 72% higher than on Unleashed. So the way that the Unleashed bleed works is that it ticks 5 times within that 10-second period. It ticks every 2 seconds. So at the first tick, you'll get 1 hemorrhaging stack. The second tick, you'll get that up to 2 stacks. And then at 3 ticks, you'll be up to 3 stacks within that 10-second window. And so if you add all of that in with the base damage, the set is actually a bit ahead of what Pillar of Nirn offers in its 10-second window. However, this set does require a blink, charge, leap, teleport, or pull to activate it. So in most PvE DPS setups, you'll be having to activate Stampede early in order to keep this up every 10 seconds. It's also not really fair to compare without taking into account that Pillar of Nirn can also sometimes proc hemorrhaging as well. While the chance is not super high, it will happen some over the course of the fight, so it's only fair to take that into account as well when comparing the damage. One more thing to consider is that hemorrhaging from Unleashed will continue continue to tick 2 more times in the next 4 seconds after that 10-second window. So if you don't refresh it right at 10 seconds, that hemorrhaging is still going there for a couple more ticks. So if you wanted, you could apply Stampede as normal every 15 seconds. And if we divide the set by 15 seconds instead of 10 seconds with adding in those 2 additional ticks, we'd have pretty close to the same average damage from the proc as what we'd get from Pillar of Nirn. But Pillar triggers off of any ability. It has those 2 crit lines, and it can also trigger hemorrhaging, which makes it a fairly superior choice overall. But I do think Unleashed is a serviceable set for PvE DPS if you really like the theme of it. It's not the best option, but definitely could work nicely with some setups. It is at least buffed up a little bit from where it was last patch, but I would still like to see those stamina lines get adjusted. From a PvP perspective, I'm curious to hear what you all think about this one, if it would add enough pressure to be worth using there. Alright, next up we have Runecarver's Blaze. This is a light set from Scrivener's Hall. Fixed an issue where this set's damage had a lower chance to apply a status effect than intended. So this one was just a small note in the patch notes that a lot of people probably brushed over because it's just a bug fix, but the change actually has quite a significant impact on the set. Previously, the damage from Runecarver was being treated as single target damage over time, and so it had that base 3% chance to proc status effects. This means in most setups you'd be looking at somewhere between an 8 to 15% chance to trigger burning with each tick. Now, it did happen some due to the really high frequency of ticks from this set, but the chance with each tick was pretty low. Now the set is coded correctly as single target direct damage. The damage triggers from damage over time skills, but each instance of damage itself is direct damage. So now with that base 10% instead of the 3%, you're looking at somewhere between a 25 to 50% chance on each tick to trigger burning, depending on your loadout. This is a significant increase. With how often the set goes off for builds that are properly setting up for it, you're going to add in a ton of extra burning damage with this. And this means that we have some flexibility in our setups to not need a flame enchantment, and we can take advantage of some of those other buffed up status effects. As an example, Cortec shared a Magicka Necroparse in the Discord server, and Runecarver's is adding a ton of damage. The extra burning damage won't be as significant here since Flame Skull is the main spammable, but it's still quite a bit more burning than would have been here, and it's especially noticeable if you're not using a spammable that procs burning already. And for those interested, here is the setup he used for that. He went with an absorb stamina glyph to proc Sundered, since the burning uptimes were already so good. So the proc from Runecarver itself was already one of the strongest in the game. The main drawback to the set for end game content is that it's light and it has a line of penetration on it that's often wasted for organized groups. But with the additional burning damage that you'll get now, even having an extra light piece or two might be worth it for some builds to take advantage of what this set can offer. And then if you actually need that penetration, maybe in 4-man dungeons for example, this set is looking really good. But I think it'll even see a lot more use in trials now as well. Dragon Knights and Necromancers both seem like they'll do really well with it, but I imagine other classes can make good use of it too. Alright, next up is Mantle of Siroria. This is a light set from Cloudrest. The perfected version now grants 129 weapon and spell damage rather than 1096 max magicka, so it now offers all the weapon and spell damage. This is a pretty nice change, especially for stamina DPS builds who saw no benefit from that max magicka line, but even for magicka builds, this is still a buff. I would like to see them do this with Reliquin as well, since magicka users don't benefit from its stamina line, and it's kind of weird since Reliquin scales with weapon and spell damage, so stamina there on the perfected bonus is a little bit meh, but I like that this was changed here. It's a nice small buff for Siroria. If we compare the stats to what we'd get with the popular Coral Riptide set, we get a bit more weapon and spell damage, but we don't get that 6% extra crit chance that's on Coral. Then with Siroria, you do have to build the stacks for 10 seconds to get to that full amount, versus Coral where you have to dip your stamina down at 33% or less to get there. But the big advantage there is that you can start the fight with that already maxed out, and you can't do that with Siroria. But Coral will still have the higher upside here if we compare their overall damage increases. I put an example set up together here where I added each of them alongside of Aegis Caller, Slimecraw, and Velothi. You can see that the maxed out Coral Riptide in this scenario is about a 22% damage increase, whereas the maxed out Siroria is about a 19% damage increase. I do think that these could perform pretty similarly for longer fights, assuming it's a fight where where Siroria is easy to manage, and Siroria would especially be attractive for classes and setups that have a hard time keeping their stamina low for Coral Riptide. You could also run them together and just get a crazy amount of weapon and spell damage if you wanted to. And then I just wanted to add in a third comparison here to see where these stack up against a more set and forget set like Onsul. Onsul is a little weird because it has that penetration line, so calculating it is a little awkward. But if you aren't benefiting at all from the penetration line that Onsul has, it's more like a 14% increase to damage overall, which is a bit behind these two other options. However, it's important to consider that this is always up and won't ever dip compared to those other two sets where you might not always be sitting at those max values. And then for scenarios where we do benefit from the penetration line, Onsul is pretty close behind Siroria at just about 1.5% behind. And again, this is always active. So this is one reason I always say that Onsul is a bit underrated. For many groups, that penetration line it has is actually pretty useful. Outside of really organized groups, armor debuff values are usually really inconsistent. So accounting for that, Onsul is a lot closer to Siroria and Coral than I think a lot of people realize. And that's comparing to those max values from those two sets. You always get this amount with Onsul. It's not dependent on a minigame, but it does have its own minigame if you want to consider adding that in. It isn't a super reliable buff to keep up, but while it is active and assuming you are benefiting from the penetration line, Onsul is actually the hardest hitting of these options while that secondary bonus is up. So it's just something to keep in mind when comparing these three popular end game DPS sets. But that's it for the changes. Not a ton of sets adjusted, but I thought the ones they did adjust were definitely worth unpacking to see how these new options fit into the current meta. I definitely see Runecarver and Siroria both getting a bit more use in Update 41. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you all think about the gear changes coming. Big shout out to my current Patreon supporters and YouTube members. The contributions help a ton to keep the website and YouTube channel going. And a special thanks to Nicholas, Simon, Cougars Bay and the Cougar City Guild, the Order of War Guild, Cantankerous Cat, Shady, Iffy, Blake1816, Mordecai 1212, Santanico, Vidridi, Florian, Phoenix, Nalandia, Unemployed, Chryseliana, Cha-Cha, Technical KO, Cap, Danco77, and Pletpron. Thanks again and see you later. Bye.